Hello everybody. In this video we're going to take a look at using image planes to help us create animations. Now you may already be familiar with using image planes when modeling, but we can also use image planes to do a technique called rotoscoping that can help us create believable motions when we're animating characters or objects. We'll also take a look at some important concepts when animating. So let's go ahead and get started. I think the first example I'm going to use is just a very simple example of something that you're probably already familiar with. In other words, using an image as an image plane for something that you might want to create a 3D model of. So let's say I wanted to model a fish, and I did some visual research. I found an image of the fish that I want to model. What I can do if I want to bring it in as reference is select my viewport. I'm going to select the side viewport because I've already found an image of a fish from the side that I want to model. And I will go to View, Image Plane, Import Image, and find the image of a fish that I saved. And here it is. So now I can use this image plane to help me model this fish very accurately. Now, we can do the same thing with animation, and that's what we're going to take a look at now. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this image plane, and we'll create a new image plane, which we will use to, we'll use it as reference to create a bouncing ball animation. This time I'm going to choose my front viewport, and the steps are identical to what we just did with the fish. I will go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. I'll navigate to where I have my image, or in this case images, and we'll apply it as our image plane. So here is the image right here. What I'd like you to notice is actually it's not just one image in here, it is a series of images, and I've used a very specific naming convention. I kept the name very simple. I just called the file A dot 0000, and what you'll notice is that all the images are numbered sequentially. So this will be the first image. If I scroll down, I could pick the image for frame 60, and you can see the tennis ball starting to fall down. I could pick the frame 83. It looks like it's probably just hit the ground or is just about to hit the ground. But the key thing to note here is that we have a series of images, and that we're using a very specific naming convention that is including the number of the frame, because these are still a series of individual still images that we're using. I'm going to go ahead and pick the first image and say OK. Now this image by itself is actually not going to help me animate because it's just a still image, and in fact if I hit the play button here, or if I scrub in my timeline, you see that all it is a simple still image, nothing more. But let's take a look at what we can do. Let's take a look at how we can apply that series of images so that we can actually see the motion, and then we can use that motion to create this realistic bouncing ball animation. So I'm going to make sure that I have the image plane selected, and then I'm going to come over here to my attribute editor, or I can just hit Control A on my keyboard to open up the attribute editor that way as well. And if we take a look at the attributes, remember that the attribute editor will show you whatever you currently have selected. It'll show you the attributes for, in this case, the image plane, because that's what I have selected right now. We have our image name, and it's currently using that very first image in that series of images in that folder. And we have a checkbox here that says Use Image Sequence. And if I just check that, you'll notice now that we have a couple other fields, including this image number field, and it is currently set to 1, meaning it's using the very first image in this image sequence. If I play the animation here, you'll see that we have some visual reference of dropping a tennis ball on a hard surface. And in fact, if I scrub in my timeline, you can see that I can scrub it to any frame. We can go forward, we can go backwards. If I go to frame 30, for example, what you'll also notice is that the image number here is set to 30. So this is a very automated process where it just goes through this sequence of images. So now that we've got that set up, let's go ahead and create our ball and start animating. So I'm going to make a sphere. That's the logical sense for making a ball. And we'll go ahead and scale it down to be roughly the size of the tennis ball in our reference image. And I'll just drag it up here to, currently, just so you know, I am on frame 30 or frame 29, because if I scrub this, it looks like I drop the ball, about from that frame, from about the frame 29, that's when I drop the ball. So I'm going to put it on frame 29, and I'll just situate this sphere that I've created, that's going to be our bouncing ball, right where the ball is in our reference material. And I will set a key. Remember, there's a number of different ways that you can set a key. I'm going to switch over to my channel box so that we can see this a little bit better. So I'll go over to my channel box, and you'll notice that in the channel box we don't currently have any animation keys set on the ball. But we can set a key a number of different ways. I can change to my animation menu set, and I can go to Key, Set Key. Or I could simply use the hotkey S, as indicated here, to also set a key on my current frame, which right now is on frame 29. So I'm going to go ahead and press S. Notice what happens here in the channel box when I do that. What you'll notice is that each of these properties, each one of these channels on the translates, on the rotates, on the scale, and on visibility all have a little red tick mark indicating that I have just set a key. Now I'm going to scrub in my timeline, and I'm going to scrub in my timeline to the point where the reference ball makes contact with the ground, which is at approximately frame 44. And then what I'm going to do is take my sphere, and I'm going to bring it down so it's at about the same height. Now, if you're wondering why it's not perfectly overlapping when I bring it straight down, it's because my reference material, when I filmed this, I had the camera at a slight angle. But that's okay. We're just using our reference material as nothing more than reference, as a guide. So now that I'm on frame 44, I'll go ahead and set a key on that frame as well. And I'll do so by just pressing S on my keyboard. Perhaps so that you can see the ball a little bit better, I'll go ahead and apply a new material to it. I'm just going to make a red material for this, just so it's very visible. I'll just use a Lambert, and we'll make that red. That way it'll be a little bit more visible on my screen for you to see. And I'll go ahead and select the ball again. Notice that when I deselect it, I don't see anything in my timeline, no tick marks there. We don't see anything really in our channel box as well. But if I select it, whatever I currently have selected in my channel box, we'll see its translation, rotate, and scale properties here. And then we'll also see that we have some tick marks indicating where we have our keyframes in our animation currently. And if I scrub the animation, you'll see that in fact the ball is animated. Now, so far we have two keyframes. We have one on frame 29, and then from frames 29 to frames 44, the ball drops. What happens next? Let's go ahead and scrub in our timeline. And I'm going to scrub to the point that the ball comes up to its apex. So we'll just bring it up, and then I'll take this sphere that I'm using as the ball, and I'll drag it also up so that it is at the same height. And once again, I will press S on my keyboard to set a keyframe. I'm going to go ahead and continue this process because if I scrub and look at my reference material, you'll see that the reference material actually has a number of bounces for this tennis ball. I might also increase my frame range here. Right now it's set from 1 to frame 120. We might be able to use a few more frames, so let's go ahead and just bring that slider over to 150. I think the ball comes to a pretty good settle at that point. And we'll go ahead and add some more keyframes to our animation. So we've got the first bounce, comes up to its apex. I'll go ahead and scrub in my timeline, looking at my reference material and for where it makes contact with the ground. This time it's on frame 66, so I'll go ahead and bring the ball down and press S to key it. Notice that before I key it, these little tick marks here are pink. That indicates that these channels are animated, but that they do not have a keyframe or any keys on my current frame, which is frame 66. As soon as I press S, those little tick marks become a bright red, indicating that they actually have a key on that exact frame. Okay, we'll go ahead and scrub forward in time again to the point where our reference material, where the ball comes and reaches its apex of this bounce. Go ahead and bring the ball up, key it, and I'm simply going to go through the process of laying these keyframes down for each one of these really important frames where we're having the ball at the extremes, where it's hitting the ground and where it's bouncing up to its highest point. So I'll just continue keying these like so. A couple things to take note of as I do this is that as the ball bounces up and down, but as it loses energy, it bounces less high. And for each one of those bounces, it actually takes less time. So as the ball is bouncing and it loses energy, it'll bounce less high, and the timing for that bounce will decrease as well. The height of the bounce will decrease, the timing of the bounce will decrease for each bounce. Okay, let's go ahead and scrub in here and continue with this. Laying down these keyframes. Bounces become very small. And that should do it. At that point, actually, the ball is just kind of rolling. So we've set down our main keyframes at this point. You can see that both with the reference material and the ball that I've just animated, that they're both dropping and bouncing up repeatedly. Now, one thing that I would like to stress, and this is where I'm going to get a little bit into some of the terminology that we use in animation. Right now, we have these keyframes that we've just set on the animated object, on the sphere. And if we scrub in our timeline here, what you'll notice is that The timing for the reference material, the tennis ball and the reference material, and the timing of the ball that I've just animated are identical. The timing is actually identical in that on frame 29, the ball is up here, just about to be dropped, and then on frame 44, the ball drops and it comes down to that point where it hits the ground. At frame, looks like frame 55, the ball bounces back up to its apex here on this bounce, and then it starts falling again, and on frame 66, the two balls make contact with the ground, and so on. So the timing of these two balls, the tennis ball in our reference material and the ball that I'm currently animating, have identical timing, but they are not bouncing identically. If we play this, you'll see that besides being at the same point at its keyframes here, they actually vary as far as what we would call their spacing. So their timing is identical. From frame 29 to frame 55, they both fall at the same distance. But if we were to go in between these two frames, you'll see that they are both at very different positions, and that is because their spacing is different. The timing is identical, the spacing is different. So now that we've got the timing identical, but the spacing is different, let's see how we can make the spacing match up more closely with our reference material. Before I do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about what's going on here. The tennis ball, when it's dropped, is picking up speed. It's getting faster and faster. So each frame, it moves further down, but also each frame, for instance, if we were to compare, let's say, frame 32, and just look at this tennis ball reference material here. The distance between frame 32 and 33 over one frame, you can see that the ball moves very little. If we go all the way to frame, in this case, if we go all the way to frame 43, you'll see that the ball is here, and then if we just go one frame over here to frame 44, you'll see that the ball at this point is moving much faster. It's moving over much more distance over that one frame period. The ball that I've animated here, the one that I've set animation keys on, is doing something a little different. It's not getting faster before it hits the ground. It's actually slowing down at this point. It's got what is called slow in, slow out. We want slow in, slow out on the apex of these bounces. When it comes up here and then it starts coming down, we want the slow in, slow out. But we really don't want to have the ball anticipating or slowing down before it hits the ground, because that's not very realistic. Now, there are a number of ways we can fix this animation, that we can make it more convincing. I'm going to show you right now one of the most basic ways. In future videos, we'll take a look at some more advanced techniques for creating an animation of a bouncing ball. So what I'm going to do is work with these frames in between these main keyframes that I've already set. These are the main poses for the ball, where it's at its apex, it comes down, hits the ground, and then we go to the next really important keyframe where it bounces back up, and then we go to the next important one where it hits the ground. What we're going to be doing now is working on the frames in between these keyframes, and we'll make it then match more closely with this ball. So let's give that a try. I'm going to go ahead and just go in between, literally in between these two keyframes here, and create an in-between. Let's try frame 36 here. And in this case, it looks like the ball is moving too fast. Let's just bring it back up and set a key. It's matching much better at that point, but then once again, we start to lose the realism here, where it starts falling too fast and then it slows down. Let's go ahead and set another keyframe here on frame 40. We'll bring it back up, key it, scrub, it's still going too fast. Let's go ahead and put a key right before it hits the ground. It hits the ground at frame 44. We'll go to 43, and I'll just bring that ball back up and key it. And now, at least between frames 29 and frame 44, the movement matches up pretty nicely. Okay. Let's go ahead and do the same for the rest of our animation. I'll go ahead and talk through this next bounce, and then I'll probably do the others a little more quickly. So again, it bounces up, but we can see our reference material is bouncing up faster than the ball that we've animated. If we go maybe in between those two keyframes and lay a key on this, we'll just bring our sphere up, key it, and I'll go ahead and just add a few more keyframes on here to make it match more closely with what we're seeing in our reference material. At this point, I'm simply going to go through the rest of the animation here, working with the in-betweens, working with the frames in between our main poses of the bouncing ball. Okay, so I've gone through the whole timeline here where I've done my in-betweens between my main keyframes. And if we play this, you'll see that the ball that I've just animated matches up pretty nicely with our reference material. So that is basically rotoscoping, because what we're doing is we're, in a sense, tracing some reference material, in this case, reference material that I made from actually taking a tennis ball and bouncing it on a hard surface. We could use this method of rotoscoping also with more complicated animations, such as characters walking, running, dancing, whatever, and we could take a pose-to-pose approach where we, in a sense, trace the reference material and then work with the in-betweens between the main poses, the keyframes. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of, or at least hide, this image plane here, and we'll take a look at the resulting animation by itself. I'm pretty much done with the image plane, so I could just delete it, but I'm going to go ahead and just hide it. I'm going to select my image plane in the attribute, or actually in the channel box. I could do it in the attribute editor, but I'm in the channel box already. I'm going to go ahead and just set the visibility to 0 to hide it. And let's go ahead and play this and see how it looks. And that looks pretty good. It looks pretty convincing. Now, one thing I do advise you to do when animating is to play the animation and watch it in your viewport. Make sure that it looks like it's animated properly, that nothing looks unusual or wrong about it. But oftentimes it makes sense to go ahead and make a quick video also of it to really be able to evaluate the motion on the object. To do so, I'm going to go ahead and just create what is called a playblast. It's just a very quick and easy type of render to create. To do so, I'm just going to right click in my timeline here, go to playblast, open up the options for it. I'll change a few of the settings here. I'm going to actually tell it to take the measurements from, or sorry, the dimension size or the display size from the render settings that I've already set in my render. I'm going to go ahead and scale it to 100%. I am going to click on Save to File, and I'll just browse really quickly and tell it where to save it to. Give it a name. So again, we want to make sure that we know where we're saving it to, and then we'll go ahead and click on Apply. And now it'll go through the process of actually creating a video. And here's the rendered video that I've just created. Before wrapping up this video, I'd like to just show one more thing, and that is some tools and some windows that we'll be looking at in future videos. So if I grab this ball, if I select it, and I go to my graph editor, which can be found under Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, this will show us the keyframes and the animation curves. It'll display the motion of this animation. And in particular, we wanted to look at the translate Y because that's where we're really getting the movement on this bouncing sphere. And just some general things to take note of. We've got a lot of keyframes in here. With future techniques that we'll be looking at, we'll look at some ways that we can keep this looking a little bit nicer, a little bit neater with fewer keyframes. But this is what we have, and you can see how this animation curve really does describe the movement of that bouncing ball. In other words, the ball comes falling down, it hits the ground, it abruptly comes out very quickly. It slows down as it reaches its apex, and then it starts falling back down again, building up speed and hitting the ground again. And it repeats this. The other thing you'll notice is that the height of the bounce becomes less and less with each bounce here. And then the other thing to take note of is that, in fact, not only is the ball bouncing less high for each bounce, but also the timing in between each bounce is becoming less and less as well. So those are some important things to understand about creating a animation of a bouncing ball. A couple other things that I think are important as a takeaway from this video is that the first thing that we did, of course, was we created our main keyframes, which were these extremes of it being at the top, hitting the ground, bouncing up, coming back down, bouncing back up, coming back down. We then went through the process of adding our in-betweens, and that's what you're seeing here. These are the in-between frames that I keyed when I went through the process of making my bouncing ball be closer to the reference material that I have of the tennis ball being dropped. Anyway, I hope that this video has been useful for you, and thank you for watching.